Lightning slashed across the Oregon sky, illuminating a soggy cardboard box trembling near the back entrance of Elmwood Community Market. Inside, curled into a ball of wet golden fur, a Labrador puppy shivered with each thunderclap. His amber eyes, unusually deep and knowing for a dog so young, watched raindrops hammer the pavement with weary resignation. "Oh my God, Mark, look!" Emma Harrison froze in the market's doorway, grocery bags momentarily forgotten as she pointed to the box. Her husband squinted through the downpour, while their 8-year-old daughter Lily darted forward before either could stop her. "Daddy! Mommy! Someone left a puppy!" Lily's voice cracked as she knelt beside the box, her yellow raincoat becoming a makeshift umbrella for the trembling animal. Mark Harrison approached carefully, expecting fear or aggression from the abandoned creature. Instead, the Labrador looked up with eyes that seemed to assess them all, looking not at them, but into them. Mark had never felt so thoroughly examined by an animal before. "He doesn't have a collar," Emma observed, having joined them and gently examining the golden-furred puppy. "He's soaked to the bone, but look how he's watching us. It's almost like he understands every word." Thunder crashed overhead, causing Lily to flinch, but the Labrador didn't. Instead, he placed one paw hesitantly on her rain boot, as if offering comfort. "Can we keep him, please?" Lily begged, already halfway in love. Mark exchanged glances with Emma, unspoken communication passing between them. They'd been discussing getting a dog for months. Lily had been asking since her 7th birthday, but they'd planned to visit shelters, make careful decisions, prepare the house. Yet here was this golden puppy, abandoned and needing a home. "We'll take him to Dr. Bright at Blue Haven Animal Care first," Emma said decisively. "He needs to be checked over, and we should see if anyone's looking for him." Mark carefully lifted the box, surprised when the puppy made no sound of protest. "He's remarkably calm," he noted, "almost like he's relieved." As they drove through the storm toward Blue Haven, none of them noticed how the puppy's eyes stayed fixed on the family's reflection in the car window, studying them with an intensity that went beyond animal instinct, like he was memorizing their faces, their voices, the way they moved together. While the Harrison family discussed possible names, the Labrador seemed to be making a different kind of decision altogether, watching, waiting, processing. When Lily suggested Ashby after her grandfather's middle name, the puppy's ears perked up for the first time. "I think he likes it," Lily said, delighted. What none of them realized was that Ashby wasn't just responding to a name. He was accepting a mission. Dr. Elowen Bright had examined thousands of animals over her 15-year career at Blue Haven Animal Care Center, but something about the golden Labrador made her pause. She checked his ears, his eyes, his reflexes, all while he watched her with an unsettling intelligence. "Well, he's about 10 months old, slightly malnourished, but no serious health issues," she told the Harrison family, who waited anxiously in the exam room. "Based on his development and behavior, I'd say he probably came from a litter, perhaps a breeder who couldn't sell him or decided he wasn't show quality." "Who could abandon him like that?" Emma asked, outrage coloring her voice. Dr. Bright's expression softened. "Unfortunately, I see it more often than I'd like. The good news is, he doesn't seem traumatized in the typical ways. No aggression, no extreme fear responses." She tilted her head, watching as Ashby calmly observed the proceedings. "Actually, he's displaying remarkable emotional regulation for a dog his age, especially considering his circumstances." "So, can we keep him?" Lily asked, hope making her voice tremble. Dr. Bright smiled. "We'll put notices up about a found dog, but honestly, left in a box like that, I'd say he needs a home, and you folks seem perfect." She handed Mark a folder. "Here's information about vaccines, nutrition, and training, but I have a feeling this one might surprise you with how quickly he learns." The Harrisons' guy's home in Willow Glen, Oregon, was a modest 2-story house with a fenced backyard that bordered a small wooded area. For the first few days, Ashby was quiet, almost withdrawn. He didn't bark, didn't play with the toys they bought him, didn't do much except watch them with those thoughtful amber eyes. He'd follow Lily around the house, staying precisely 3 steps behind her, like a shadow with its own agenda. "Do you think he's unhappy?" Lily asked her parents one evening, her face troubled as she watched Ashby lying on his new bed, observing the family's dinner routine. "I think he's adjusting," Mark reassured her. "Remember what Dr. Bright said, he might have some emotional healing to do." But on the 5th day, something shifted. Lily was struggling with her math homework at the kitchen table, frustration building as she erased the same problem for the third time. A soft whine made her look up. Ashby stood beside her chair, and then, with deliberate precision, he pushed her pencil case closer with his nose. "Ashby?" Lily whispered, amazed. The Labrador nudged her hand gently, as if encouraging her to try again. When she picked up her pencil, he sat beside her, his warm presence somehow calming. Lily finished her homework with newfound focus, and when she closed her book, Ashby's tail wagged for the first time since they'd brought him home. It was as if a dam had broken. Over the next few weeks, Ashby transformed from observer to participant. He learned to open doors by pulling on dishcloths tied to handles. He would bring specific toys when asked for them by name. One night, when Mark forgot to turn off the living room lights before bed, Ashby rose from his bed, nosed the light switch off, and returned to his place beside Lily's bed. "He's saving energy," Mark joked the next morning. "We've got ourselves an environmentally conscious dog." Emma laughed, but her eyes held wonder. "I've never seen anything like it. It's like he's thinking 5 steps ahead." What truly set Ashby apart, however, was his empathy. When Lily scraped her knee on the driveway, he appeared with the first aid kit from beneath the bathroom sink, before Emma could even ask for it. When Mark struggled with insomnia, Ashby would sit beside him in the dark living room, a silent companion until Mark's eyes grew heavy. When Emma received news that her mother was ill, Ashby somehow sensed her distress from another room and came to press against her leg as tears formed in her eyes. "It's almost like he was meant to find us," Emma whispered to Mark one night, watching Ashby sleeping peacefully at the foot of Lily's bed, "like he has some kind of purpose." She couldn't have known how right she was. Spring melted into summer, and Ashby's presence in the Harrison household had become as natural as the changing seasons. His reputation at Linden Trail Park, where Lily took him for afternoon romps, grew quickly. Other dog owners would watch in astonishment as Ashby organized impromptu games among the puppies, deliberately rolling a ball slower towards smaller dogs and faster for the more athletic ones. "It's like he's the playground monitor," joked Susan Teller, whose corgi Milo adored Ashby. "He makes sure everyone gets included." But as summer waned and autumn's first crisp breezes stirred the leaves, a change came over Ashby. The Labrador, who had blossomed into such a joyful presence, grew quiet again. He spent hours gazing out the window, his tail no longer wagging with its usual enthusiasm. His appetite diminished, leaving kibble untouched in his bowl. "Maybe he's coming down with something," Mark suggested, watching Ashby ignore his favorite chew toy. Concerned, Emma scheduled another visit to Dr. Bright. After a thorough examination that revealed no physical ailments, Dr. Bright sat back on her heels and studied the listless Labrador. "I believe Ashby is experiencing something we call canine grief," she explained gently. "Dogs form deep emotional bonds, and when those bonds are severed, they can display symptoms remarkably similar to human depression." "But who is he grieving?" Lily asked, stroking Ashby's head. "He has us." Dr. Bright smiled kindly. "Remember those puppies he played with at the park all summer? Susan mentioned that 3 families moved away last month: the Dachshund, the Beagle, and that little terrier mix he seemed particularly close to." Emma's eyes widened. "You think he misses his friends?" "Dogs are profoundly social creatures," Dr. Bright confirmed, "and Ashby seems to have an unusually high emotional intelligence. Just give him time, extra attention, and maybe try introducing him to some new playmates." They followed Dr. Bright's advice, but Ashby's melancholy persisted, until one stormy night changed everything. The rain had been relentless for hours, drumming against the windows with occasional bursts of thunder. The Harrison family was fast asleep when a strange scratching sound woke Emma. Half asleep, she realized Ashby wasn't in his usual spot on Lily's bed. "Mark," she whispered, nudging her husband. "I think Ashby's at the back door." Pulling on robes, they made their way downstairs where the scratching continued urgently. Mark flipped on the porch light and opened the door, expecting to see their dog wanting back in after a bathroom break. What they saw instead left them speechless. Ashby stood on the porch, soaking wet, his golden fur plastered to his body, but it wasn't his appearance that stunned them. It was what he held so carefully in his mouth, a tiny grey kitten, no bigger than his paw, its eyes still closed, trembling violently. "Oh my God," Emma breathed, immediately kneeling down. With infinite gentleness, Ashby walked past her into the house and laid the kitten on his own bed in the corner of the living room. Then he began to lick it with methodical care, warming the little creature with his tongue just as a mother cat would. Where did he find it? Mark wondered aloud, grabbing towels to help dry them both. Emma shook her head, speechless, as Ashby arranged his body around the kitten, creating a warm cave of fur and safety. The tiny thing mewed weakly, and Ashby looked up at the humans with an expression that seemed to say, "Now help me save it." By morning, the kitten, nicknamed Grey by a delighted Lily, had stabilized. Emma had stayed up half the night feeding it kitten formula through a tiny dropper, while Ashby supervised every movement with unwavering attention. "Now we should take it to Blue Haven," Mark said over breakfast, watching as Ashby lay beside the makeshift nest they'd created from a shoebox and soft blankets. "Dr. Bright will know what to do," Emma agreed. What they didn't anticipate was Ashby's reaction. When Mark picked up the shoebox, the Labrador positioned himself at the door with such determination that there was no question. He was coming along. Dr. Bright examined the kitten with gentle hands. "She's about 2 weeks old, severely undernourished and dehydrated. Another night out there?" She left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Where exactly did Ashby find her? "We don't know," Emma admitted. "He showed up at the door with her already in his mouth." Dr. Bright raised an eyebrow. "That's unusual behavior for a dog. Typically, a Labrador's retrieval instinct doesn't extend to other species." "Young." She glanced at Ashby, who hadn't moved from beside the exam table, his eyes tracking every movement of her hands. Then again, everything about Ashby seems to be the exception to the rule. With instructions for round-the-clock feeding and care, they returned home, the kitten safely cradled in Lily's lap, while Ashby sat unusually close, his body vibrating with what seemed like nervous energy. That night, an even stranger event unfolded. At precisely 11 p.m., Ashby began pacing by the back door, whining quietly. "He needs to go out," Mark murmured, half asleep on the couch. Emma frowned. "But he's never asked to go out this late before." Reluctantly, Mark opened the door. Ashby gave him one long, meaningful look before disappearing into the darkness. "Should we go after him?" Emma worried, peering into the night. Mark shook his head. "He knows his way home. Let's give him 15 minutes. But 15 minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Just as they were about to search for him, scratch sounds came again at the door. This time, when they opened it, Ashby stood there with another kitten. This one orange and white, slightly larger than Grey, but in even worse condition, its tiny body covered in what looked like mud and debris. Without waiting for their reaction, Ashby carried this kitten to his bed as well, gently placing it beside Grey before beginning the same cleaning routine. Emma and Mark exchanged bewildered glances before springing into action. Warm water, towels, another dropper of formula. "What's happening?" Lily asked sleepily from the stairs, rubbing her eyes. "Ashby's brought home another friend," Mark explained, his voice filled with wonder. By dawn, the second kitten was clean, fed, and sleeping beside Grey in the now expanded shoebox nest. And Ashby, exhausted but seemingly satisfied, finally closed his eyes, his mission, whatever it was, apparently completed. Or so they thought. The next night, at exactly the same time, Ashby repeated his request to go out. This time the family watched from the window as he navigated purposefully through the backyard, over the fence and toward the wooded area behind their property. "Should we follow him?" Lily whispered. Emma nodded slowly. "I think we'd better." Mark grabbed flashlights and they set out, careful to keep Ashby's golden form in sight without interfering. They watched amazed as he crossed a small stream using fallen logs, avoided the yard of a house with a notoriously aggressive dog, and finally approached the abandoned old timber mill at the edge of town, a place parents warned their children to avoid due to its decaying structure. Through a broken window, Ashby slipped inside. The Harrisons crept closer, peering through dusty glass. What they saw inside made Emma's hand fly to her mouth. In a corner of the dilapidated building, a severely malnourished mother cat lay on her side, barely moving, surrounded by several kittens, some moving, some frighteningly still. Ashby approached her with slow, submissive body language, his tail low, his head bowed. The mother cat watched him without energy to flee. With incredible gentleness, Ashby nosed one of the kittens, a black and white one, and began to clean it. "He's helping her," Mark whispered, awestruck. "But he's trying to save them all." They watched as Ashby worked tirelessly, cleaning the weakest kitten until it began to move more vigorously, then gently picking it up in his mouth. The mother cat made no move to stop him as if understanding, or too weak to protest. When Ashby turned toward the window, kitten securely in his mouth, he froze upon seeing the family. For a moment he looked almost guilty, caught in an act he hadn't meant them to witness. Then his eyes seemed to plead with them, as if to say, "Help me finish this." The next 48 hours transformed the Harrison household into an impromptu animal rescue center. After witnessing Ashby's midnight mission, they called emergency animal services. Within hours, the mother cat, whom Lily named Hope, and her remaining kittens were safely transported to Blue Haven Animal Care. "It's nothing short of miraculous," Dr. Bright told them, shaking her head in disbelief as she examined the rescued feline family. This mother cat was severely dehydrated and malnourished. Another day or two, she didn't finish the sentence, but her expression conveyed everything. And these kittens, the ones Ashby brought to you first, were the weakest ones. He somehow knew exactly which ones needed immediate intervention. Mark shook his head, still processing what they'd witnessed. But how did he know? How did he even find them in the first place? Dr. Bright smiled thoughtfully, watching Ashby, who sat patiently in the corner of the exam room, his amber eyes never leaving the kittens. Labradors have incredible noses. They're used in search and rescue operations for good reason. But this, she gestured toward Ashby, this suggests something beyond mere instinct. He didn't just find them, he triaged them. That's not standard canine behavior. The black and white kitten, the third one Ashby had rescued, was in the worst condition of all, suffering from a severe respiratory infection that required specialized care. Dr. Bright hooked up a small nebulizer to help its labored breathing. "We're calling this one Oreo," Lily announced, watching the tiny creature fight for each breath. "That's a good name," Dr. Bright agreed. "But I should warn you, Oreo's chances are..." She glanced at Lily and softened her assessment. "Oreo will need round-the-clock monitoring." To everyone's surprise, Ashby positioned himself directly beside the carrier containing the sick kitten, his body rigid with purpose. When Dr. Bright tried to move him so she could check Oreo again, he refused to budge. "I think he's appointed himself guardian," she said with a bemused smile. That night, they brought Oreo home with special equipment, while Hope and the other kittens remained at Blue Haven for treatment. Every 4 hours, Emma or Mark would administer the nebulizer treatment to the tiny kitten. And every time, without fail, Ashby would alert them minutes before the alarm was set to go off, as if he had an internal clock perfectly calibrated to Oreo's needs. Even more remarkably, he seemed to sense when Oreo's breathing became labored. In the middle of one night, he woke Mark by pulling insistently on his sleeve, then leading him straight to the kitten's box where Oreo was struggling, the tiny chest heaving with effort. "It's like having a furry nurse," Emma remarked the next morning, watching as Ashby gently nudged the 3 rescued kittens together on his bed, arranging them so the smallest one, Gray, was in the middle, benefiting from the body heat of the others. "It's like he was born for this," Lily said, her voice filled with the pure conviction of a child seeing magic in the world. For 2 weeks, the Harrison home operated like a 24-hour veterinary hospital. Gray, the first kitten, began to thrive almost immediately. The second kitten, now named Ember for his orange coat, took longer but eventually started to play. His tiny paws batting at strings, Lily dangled above him. Oreo's recovery was slower, more precarious. There were nights when they feared the worst, when the tiny black and white body seemed too frail to continue fighting. But through it all, Ashby remained steadfast. He slept beside their box, his body curved protectively around them. During feedings, he would watch intently, sometimes using his paw with surprising dexterity to steady a wobbly kitten. When they began to explore beyond their box, he would herd them back when they ventured too far, his movements gentle but decisive. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Bright confessed during a follow-up visit. "It's as if he's imprinted on these kittens, but that's a behavior we typically see in birds, not canines, and certainly not cross-species like this." As news of Ashby's unusual behavior spread through the close-knit community of Willow Glen, visitors began to appear at the Harrison home. Friends, neighbors, even strangers, all wanting to witness the dog who had adopted kittens. Most were supportive, even bringing supplies for the growing makeshift animal sanctuary. But not everyone viewed Ashby's behavior with the same wonder. "Serial cat snatcher." The headline of the Willow Glen Weekly made Emma choke on her coffee. Beneath the sensationalist words was a blurry photo of Ashby carrying a kitten, his expression made to look menacing by the poor quality of the image. Who would write something so ridiculous? She fumed, scanning the article. Her eyes narrowed as she reached the byline. Thorn Rask. Mr. Rask was well known in Willow Glen, a retired English teacher with a perpetual scowl and a reputation for writing scathing letters to the editor about everything from teenagers' fashion choices to the town's decision to install a new playground, a noisy waste of taxpayer dollars. He lived 3 houses down from the Harrisons and had never made any secret of his disdain for pets, keeping his immaculate yard fortified with "no animals allowed" signs. He claims Ashby is prowling the neighborhood and abducting beloved pets. Emma read aloud incredulously. This is absurd. Doesn't he understand Ashby saved those kittens? Mark took the paper from her hands, his expression darkening as he read. He's calling for a town meeting to discuss the menace in our midst. This is ridiculous. But ridiculous or not, the article struck a nerve in the community. Suddenly, people who had never met Ashby or witnessed his gentle care of the kittens were discussing him as if he were dangerous. Cat owners began keeping their pets indoors. At Linden Trail Park, where Ashby had once been welcomed warmly, other dog owners now pulled their pets closer when he approached. Lily felt the change most acutely at school. Children whose parents had read Rask's inflammatory article began to avoid her, some whispering "cat snatcher" when she walked by. One afternoon, she came home in tears. Madison said her mum won't let her come over anymore because our dog is a public hazard. She sobbed into Emma's shoulder. But Ashby would never hurt anyone. He saved the kittens. Emma held her daughter close, anger and helplessness warring within her. I know, sweetheart. Some people just don't understand. The situation escalated when anonymous letters began appearing in their mailbox. Remove the dangerous animal, one demanded. Soisim, think of our children's safety, warned another. This is getting out of hand, Mark said that evening, tossing the latest letter into the trash. Maybe I should talk to Rask directly, explain what really happened. But when Mark knocked on Thorn Rask's meticulously painted front door the next day, the reception was frosty at best. I am simply expressing the concerns of the community, Rask said primly, refusing to invite Mark inside. That animal has been seen carrying cats around our neighborhood. What kind of precedent does that set? Today it's kittens. Tomorrow it could be anything or anyone. That's absurd, Mark protested. Ashby was rescuing abandoned kittens from the old mill. Their mother was dying, he saved their lives. Rask's thin lips curled. A convenient narrative. Do you have proof that's what happened? Or are we simply supposed to take the word of a family that's clearly too emotionally attached to see reason? Before Mark could respond, Rask pulled out a clipboard. I've started a petition calling for the removal of your dog from Willow Glen. I already have 30 signatures, and I expect to have 50 by the town meeting next week. His eyes, cold behind wire-rimmed glasses, offered no compromise. Nothing personal, Mr. Harrison. It's simply a matter of public safety. Mark walked home with a heavy heart, unsure how to protect both his family and Ashby from the growing hostility. When he shared Rask's petition with Emma, her eyes filled with tears of frustration. How can people be so willfully blind, she asked. They're condemning him without even trying to understand. What hurt most was how the controversy was affecting Ashby himself. The once confident Labrador now hesitated before going outside, as if sensing the judgment that awaited him. When they walked in the neighborhood, he stayed unusually close to Lily's side, his tail tucked low, amber eyes scanning constantly for threats. Only with the kittens did he still seem fully himself, attentive, protective, nurturing. As the 3 foundlings grew stronger, they began to see Ashby as a surrogate parent, climbing over his patient form, batting at his ears, falling asleep on his back. And through it all, he watched over them with unwavering dedication. But outside the safety of home, storm clouds continued to gather. The town meeting was scheduled for Wednesday evening at the Willow Glen Community Center. As the Harrisons prepared to attend, Mark knelt before Lily. Remember, no matter what people say tonight, we know the truth about Ashby, he told her firmly. And we're going to make sure everyone else knows it too. Lily nodded solemnly. I made this for him, she said, holding up a hand-drawn sign that read, Ashby Hero Dog Not Cat Snatcher, decorated with wobbly stars and paw prints. Emma smiled despite her anxiety. It's perfect, honey. None of them could have anticipated how that evening would unfold, or how the true extent of Ashby's extraordinary mission would finally be revealed. The Willow Glen Community Center buzzed with tension as residents filed in. many already taking sides in what the local news had dubbed the Great Dog Debate. The Harrisons sat in the front row, Lily clutching her homemade sign, her small face set with determination beyond her years. Mayor Laura Chen opened the meeting with a plea for civility. "We're here to discuss concerns raised by some community members about a dog named Ashby, owned by the Harrison family," she explained, her tone neutral. "Mr. Rask, as the primary petitioner, you have the floor first." Thorne Rask approached the podium with the confident stride of a man who believed absolutely in his own righteousness. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and began. "Fellow citizens of Willow Glen, I come before you tonight not as an enemy of animals, but as a concerned resident who values safety and order." His voice carried through the room, the practiced cadence of a former teacher. "The dog in question has been observed carrying cats throughout our neighborhood, entering private property, disrupting the natural order of things." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Rask continued, his voice rising. "I have with me a petition signed by 53 residents who agree that this animal presents a clear and present danger to our community. I am not suggesting anything drastic, merely that the dog be relocated to a more appropriate setting, perhaps a farm where its unusual behaviors would not threaten our pets and potentially our children." Emma's hand tightened around Mark's as Rask continued, painting Ashby as an unpredictable menace. Lily's lower lip trembled, but she held her sign higher. When Rask finally concluded his speech with a dramatic call for immediate action before tragedy strikes, Mayor Chen nodded formally. "Thank you, Mr. Rask. Now we'll hear from the Harrison family." Mark stood, but before he could reach the podium, the community center doors burst open. All heads turned to see Lieutenant Orrin Hale of the Willow Glen Police Department standing in the entrance, his expression grave. "Forgive the interruption," he said, his deep voice cutting through the confused murmurs, "but I believe I have information relevant to this discussion." Mayor Chen gestured him forward. "Of course, Lieutenant. Please." Lieutenant Hale was well respected in Willow Glen, a 20-year veteran of the force known for his fairness and calm judgment. He walked slowly to the front, acknowledging the Harrisons with a small nod before addressing the room. "Earlier today, my department received an anonymous tip about possible animal abandonment at the old timber mill," he began. "Given the discussions happening in our community lately, I decided to investigate personally." The room fell silent, all eyes fixed on the tall officer. What I found was disturbing. In the basement area of the mill, there were clear signs that a mother cat had recently given birth in deplorable conditions. His voice remained professional, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. Based on the evidence, including paw prints of various sizes, it appears that several kittens did not survive the harsh conditions." Gasps punctuated the silence. Even Thorne Rask's confident posture faltered slightly. "More importantly," Lieutenant Hale continued, "we found incontrovertible evidence that an animal, a large dog based on the paw prints, had been visiting this location regularly. This dog had been bringing food, scraps that could only have come from a home environment, and had created a sort of pathway through the debris, apparently to access the cat family." He paused, looking directly at Thorne Rask. "Mr. Rask, in your article, you described this dog as a serial cat snatcher. What our investigation reveals is something entirely different. This was not a predator stealing beloved pets. This was a rescue operation." The silence in the room deepened. Lieutenant Hale turned to address the entire gathering. "In 15 years on this job, I've seen the very worst and occasionally the very best of humanity. Today, ironically, it was an animal that reminded me what true humanity means." His voice grew passionate, losing its official edge. "This dog isn't a menace or a threat. Based on all evidence, this dog is a hero, saving the lives of abandoned kittens that would have otherwise perished. And perhaps we should all be ashamed that it took a Labrador to show us what compassion really looks like." Emma couldn't hold back her tears. Lily beamed, holding her sign even higher. And Mark stared at Lieutenant Hale with undisguised gratitude. Mayor Chen, visibly moved, stepped forward. "Thank you for this information, Lieutenant. In light of this evidence, I think we need to reconsider the entire premise of this meeting." She turned to the crowd. "Does anyone else wish to speak?" A moment of silence passed before a small elderly woman rose shakily from her seat. Dr. Juniper Vale, the town's most senior veterinarian, made her way slowly to the front, her cane tapping a steady rhythm on the polished floor. "I've been treating animals in this town for over 40 years, she began, her voice frail but clear, And in all that time I've never encountered anything like what's been described here, but I believe it. Her faded blue eyes swept the room. Animals are capable of extraordinary compassion, often more so than humans. I would be honored to offer my services, free of charge, to care for the rescued mother cat and any remaining kittens. One by one, other community members stood to speak. Susan Teller from the park recounted how Ashby had once guided her lost corgi back to her. A mail carrier described how Ashby would bring Lily's shoes to the door so she wouldn't have to walk barefoot on hot pavement to get the mail. A teacher from Lily's school spoke of seeing Ashby wait patiently outside a broken bird's nest for hours, keeping neighborhood cats away until the parent birds returned. As the stories accumulated, the mood in the room transformed. The fear and suspicion that had dominated just an hour earlier gave way to something different: admiration, wonder, even shame at how quickly judgment had been passed. Through it all, Thorne Rask sat rigid in his chair, his petition forgotten on the seat beside him. When the testimonials finally ended, Mayor Chen looked toward him. "Mr. Rask, would you like to respond to what we've heard?" All eyes turned to the older man. For a long moment he remained frozen, his face unreadable. Then, slowly, he got to his feet. For once the articulate former teacher seemed at a loss for words. "I may have been hasty in my assessment." The admission clearly cost him. Each word forced past decades of stubborn certainty. He didn't look at the Harrisons as he made his way to the exit. Shoulders hunched, the petition left behind. Mayor Chen watched him go, then turned back to the room with a smile. "I think we can consider this matter resolved. The Harrison family and their extraordinary dog have this community's full support, and I would suggest, our gratitude." As the meeting disbanded, people surrounded the Harrisons, offering apologies, asking to meet Ashby, volunteering supplies and help for the rescued kittens. Lieutenant Hale approached them last, a slightly embarrassed smile on his weathered face. "I should have known something wasn't right about those accusations," he told them quietly. "My daughter's class visited your home last month for that science project. She came home talking about the dog who takes care of kittens for days. Kids see the truth that we adults sometimes miss." As they drove home that night, Lily finally relaxed against the back seat. "I knew people would understand once they knew the truth," she said, her voice heavy with the relief that only comes after great worry. "Ashby was just trying to help." Mark exchanged a glance with Emma in the rearview mirror. "Sometimes people are afraid of what they don't understand," he said gently. But tonight showed that when people take the time to learn the truth, most of them want to do the right thing. When they arrived home, Ashby was waiting by the window, his amber eyes lighting up at their return. The three kittens were curled together on his bed, tiny paws twitching in sleep. "So guess what, Ashby?" Lily ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Everyone knows you're a hero now." And though it might have been their imagination, the Harrisons could have sworn they saw understanding in their dog's deep amber eyes. 3 days after the town meeting, the Harrisons were startled by a knock at their door. When Mark opened it, he found Thorne Rask standing awkwardly on their porch, holding a large hand-woven basket filled with pet supplies, premium dog food, kitten formula, toys, and blankets. "Mr. Rask," Mark said, unable to hide his surprise. The older man cleared his throat. I came to apologize," he said stiffly, his eyes fixed somewhere over Mark's shoulder. "My behavior was inexcusable. I allowed old prejudices to cloud my judgment." Mark hesitated, then stepped aside. "Would you like to come in?" Rask looked startled by the invitation, but nodded curtly. As he entered the living room, he froze at the sight of Ashby, who had risen from his spot beside the kitten box, his posture alert but not aggressive. "Hello there," Rask said awkwardly, addressing the dog directly. "I suppose I owe you the biggest apology of all." To everyone's surprise, Ashby approached the older man slowly, circled him once, then sat at his feet, looking up with those intelligent eyes. "He's evaluating me," Rask observed, a hint of wonder creeping into his voice. "He does that," Emma said, entering the room. "But he seems to understand people in a way most humans don't." Rask nodded, then knelt with some difficulty to place the basket on the floor. "These are for you and for them," he said, gesturing toward the kittens. "It's not much, but it's very generous," Emma assured him. "Thank you." An uncomfortable silence fell until Lily, always the peacemaker, asked, "Would you like to meet the kittens, Mr. Rask?" Something shifted in the old man's face, a softening around the eyes, a slight tremor in his thin lips. Yes, I would. They watched in amazement as the neighborhood's most notorious curmudgeon lowered himself to the floor beside the kitten box with surprising gentleness. When Gray, the smallest kitten, approached his outstretched hand, Rask's expression transformed completely. "I had a cat once," he said softly, watching as the kitten sniffed his fingers. "When I was a boy. My father." He trailed off, then looked up at the Harrisons with decades of pain in his eyes. "My father was not a kind man. When my cat had kittens, he didn't allow them to stay." Understanding dawned on Emma's face. "I'm so sorry." Rask nodded, a lifetime of guarded emotions finally breaking through. "I never forgave him, and somewhere along the way, I stopped allowing myself to care about animals at all. It was easier than remembering." The room fell quiet except for the soft mewling of the kittens. Then slowly, deliberately, Ashby moved to sit beside Rask, his warm body pressing against the older man's side in a gesture of unmistakable comfort. "You're a remarkable creature," Rask whispered, tentatively placing a hand on Ashby's golden head. Perhaps you understand more than any of us." That moment marked the beginning of an unlikely transformation. Within a week, Thorn Rask had converted his meticulously maintained garden shed into a recovery center for rescued animals. His "No Animals Allowed" signs disappeared, replaced by feeders for birds and squirrels. The man who had once campaigned against Ashby now visited daily, bringing treats and often staying to help with the seemingly endless task of feeding and cleaning up after the growing kittens. "It's like he's making up for lost time," Emma observed to Mark one evening, watching through the window as Rask sat on their back porch, carefully bottle-feeding a new rescue kitten while Ashby supervised. "I think Ashby knew exactly what he was doing," Mark replied. "Not just with the kittens, but with Rask too. Somehow he saw what the rest of us missed, that beneath all that bitterness was someone who needed healing just as much as those kittens did." As word spread about Ashby's extraordinary behavior, the Harrisons received an unexpected visit from Dr. Bryn Marlowe, a renowned animal behaviorist from Pacific Northwest University. "And I've been studying canine cognition for 15 years, she explained, watching Ashby orchestrate play between the now active kittens. "But I've never documented anything quite like this. With your permission, I'd like to observe Ashby and write a case study." Over the next few weeks, Dr. Marlowe spent hours documenting Ashby's interactions with the kittens, his problem-solving abilities, and his apparent empathy. Her resulting paper, Cross-Species Caregiving, Evidence of Advanced Cognitive and Emotional Processing in Canines, created a sensation in academic circles. "What Ashby demonstrates goes beyond instinct," she told the Harrisons when she presented them with a copy of her published work. "He shows evidence of abstract reasoning, strategic planning, and interspecies empathy at levels we typically associate with great apes, not domestic dogs. He's not just special, he's extraordinary." The ripple effects of Ashby's actions continued to spread throughout Willow Glen. Inspired by his example, the town council established the Ashby Project, a community-wide initiative to support animal rescue and welfare. The local elementary school incorporated a unit on animal empathy into their science curriculum, using Ashby's story as a centerpiece. A children's book, Ashby, the Four-Legged Hero, became required reading in Whitmore Elementary's third-grade class. Most remarkably, the town's animal shelter reported a 300% increase in adoptions, with many families specifically requesting special needs animals that might otherwise have been overlooked. As for Hope, the mother cat rescued from the old timber mill, she slowly recovered under Dr. Vale's care. When she was finally strong enough to be reunited with her kittens, including the 3 Ashby had rescued, the Harrisons brought them all home for the reunion. They watched, tears in their eyes, as the once skeletal mother cat recognized her offspring, purring loudly as she circled them, touching noses and rubbing against each tiny body. Through it all, Ashby sat nearby, alert but not interfering, as if understanding that his role was changing, that he had carried these precious lives through their darkest hours, and now it was time for their real mother to take over. That night, as the Harrison family sat on their back porch watching the sunset, Ashby lay at their feet, his mission seemingly complete. Lily stroked his golden head, her eyes thoughtful. "Do you think he knew all along?" she asked softly. "About the kittens, about Mr. Rask, about everything?" Emma smiled. "I think Ashby sees the world differently than we do. He doesn't just see what is, he sees what could be." And then he does something about it. Summer turned to fall, and life in the Harrison household settled into a new normal. Hope and her kittens, now healthy and thriving, found homes with families carefully vetted by Dr. Vale, with one exception. Oreo, the tiny black and white kitten who had fought so hard to survive, became a permanent member of the Harrison family, much to Ashby's evident satisfaction. On a crisp Sunday morning, the Harrisons were enjoying a picnic at Cedar Creek Park when Ashby suddenly became alert, his nose twitching, ears pricked forward. Before anyone could react, he was gone, bounding toward the wooded area at the edge of the park. "Ashby!" Lily called, starting to follow. "Wait," Mark said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Let's trust him." 15 minutes later, Ashby returned, moving carefully through the tall grass. In his mouth, held with infinite gentleness, was a tiny wild rabbit, its leg clearly injured. As the Harrisons gathered around, Ashby placed the rabbit on the picnic blanket and looked up at them, his amber eyes filled with an emotion that could only be described as purpose. The message was clear. There's always someone who needs help. There's always more work to be done. And in that moment, watching their extraordinary dog begin the careful process of caring for yet another vulnerable creature, the Harrisons understood that Ashby had never been just a pet. He was a teacher, showing all of Willow Glen, what it truly means to see beyond differences, to care without conditions, to help without hesitation. As the sun filtered through the autumn leaves, casting golden light on the scene, Lily whispered what they were all thinking. "He's not just saving animals, he's saving us." And Ashby, hearing her words, looked up briefly from his newest charge, his amber eyes seeming to say, "That was the plan all along." My friends, we have reached the end of the story. Did you like it? What lesson can you bring to life from this story? Leave it here in the comments. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and watch this video that's playing on your screen. This story will impact you. See you next time.